Well, hello, good morning, everybody. Looks like we're ready to start. Welcome to the co-hosted Orland Park Area Chamber of Commerce and Small Business Advocacy Council's Town Hall to discuss the Illinois graduated income tax. My name is Michael Hardick. I am a vice president with First Secure Bank locally. I am current president of the Orland Park Area Chamber of Commerce, and it's my pleasure to greet you this morning. We here at the Chamber would like to thank the Village and everyone here at the Civic Center for allowing us the opportunity to use this space. This is actually a bit of a first for us here at the Chamber, to be able to bring you an event like this. We have generally stayed away from political topics. With that being said, this is what has us so excited about our new and growing relationship with the Small Business Advocacy Council, and a thank you to their board members who traveled far to make this trip. The SBAC is a nonpartisan group. They are an active group, and they're looking out for Illinois small business owners. I think that's something here at the Chamber we should all get behind. Speaking of the Chamber, we have premier members: Bonefish Grill, Edwards Realty, Inside Looks, McAllister's Deli, RizaCars.com, Nothing Bundt Cakes, Providence Life Services, and Maxim Maintenance. A big part of what allows us to continue to increase our value to membership is a commitment that these premier members make, and we'd like to thank them. We also have local elected officials in the crowd: Village President Keith Pacow, who is on the panel, Trustee Bill Healy, Trustee Kathy Fenton, Mayor of Homer Glen, George Yukich, and Mayor of Palos Park, John Mahoney. Thank you guys for your support today. We have a great panel here this morning. You didn't come here to talk, hear from me. So I'm ready to, without further delay, turn it over to our moderator for discussion. Please welcome SBAC's president and founder, Elliot Richardson.
All right, I'm just getting settled here. Okay, so thank you all for coming today. This is our first town hall on the proposed graduated income tax. We're very thankful for our panel. We're very, very thankful to the Orland Park Chamber of Commerce for being partners with the SBAC, for helping to make this happen. This is an incredibly important Chamber of Commerce. This is an important area for economic prosperity here in the state of Illinois, and we cannot thank you enough for allowing us to come out. So what we're going to do before we start our panel discussion is the Director of Revenue for the state of Illinois, David Harris, is joining us today. And he has an important voice as it pertains to the fiscal viability of the state of Illinois, and how that plays into a proposed graduated income tax. I've been to Director Harris's office when he was a state representative, and he did math. We've talked about this earlier, and I'm still trying to figure that out. And it's been about 3 years. But he's going to talk a little bit about the fiscal condition of the state and why more revenue is necessary, and then we'll move into our discussion. So we're going to give Director Harris about 10 minutes, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't you come up here?
Thank you. Well, Elliot, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, I walked in this morning, and I haven't been down to the south suburbs all that often, so my apologies there. I'm a northwest suburban fellow. I live up in the northwest suburbs of Cook County. But as I was driving through, I just mentioned to Mayor Pacow how I think vibrant the Orland Park area is. It's great to see so many folks from the local Chamber of Commerce here. Delighted to be here with Senator Cunningham. I can tell you, having served in the legislature, that you've got some great representatives, both on the House side as well on the Senate side, representing you. So hats off to them. Let me just take a couple of minutes, as Elliot mentioned. I have worked with him before. As a matter of fact, when I was a legislator, we worked together to lower the LLC rates in the state of Illinois, which was a significant move, I think, that helped a lot of businesses throughout the state. And that's one of the things which I'm very sensitive to, which is the business environment in the state of Illinois. So as the director of the Department of Revenue, let me tell you that I'm a Republican. I served 18 years in the House Revenue Committee, 8 years on the Appropriations Committee, and the governor, when he was running for election, said, I want to reach out to Republicans and build a bipartisan administration. And indeed, that's what he has done and is doing. And I was appointed as the Director of Revenue, and I was absolutely delighted when the governor asked me to serve as the Director of Revenue. I'm delighted to be the director of an agency that can give you an extension to one of only two certainties in life. Think about that for a second. So let's talk about the fiscal condition of the state of Illinois and the idea. And Elliot asked me to specifically key in on the fair tax, the graduated income tax, which I'll do. Before I do that, though, let's just step back for a second and look at where we were last November when the governor was campaigning. The governor campaigned on a number of issues, and he was very straightforward on the issues that he campaigned on. The governor said, I believe in an increase in the minimum wage. I believe in making adult use cannabis legal. I believe in moving from a flat tax to a graduated income tax. My point there is very straightforward. The governor made some promises in the campaign, and he has moved with the legislature on those promises, and successfully on those promises. Before I get to the flat tax, let me talk just for a second about the minimum wage, because it concerns obviously a lot of businesses. They said, oh my gosh, we're going to increase the minimum wage. Is that going to push businesses out of the state of Illinois? A couple of points about the minimum wage, which the governor felt very strongly about. As a matter of fact, it was his first initiative, and the initiative which he pushed very strongly. He believed that it genuinely benefited individuals of low income. We're raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Over 6 years. It doesn't kick in at the state level until 2025 in full. By the time we reach $12 an hour, that's the same level that Missouri is at. So the wage pressures for $15 an hour are not just in Illinois, they're around the nation, and the governor took a very reasonable approach. And he said to the Department of Revenue, look, tell me how we can grant a tax credit to those businesses that are going to be impacted. And the Department of Revenue worked to come up with a tax credit which is against your withholding taxes, because a lot of companies, as you know, may not have an income tax liability. But if you have an employee, you have a withholding tax liability. We built in a tax credit for businesses that might be impacted by the minimum wage. My point in saying that is that the governor recognizes, very genuinely recognizes what the impact is on individuals. And when he approached the fair tax, he said, okay, during the course of the campaign, I said, I don't want this to impact middle income individuals. So what level do we place a graduate, or do we start a graduated income tax? And that level turned out to be $250,000. So if your income that you report to the Department of Revenue is $250,000 in a year or less, you are going to pay generally less, maybe the same if you absolutely have $250,000 right on the button. But anything less than $250,000, you are going to get a slight decrease in your state income tax. 97%, and we ran the numbers, 6.1 million taxpayers in the state of Illinois, 97% of taxpayers in the state of Illinois are going to be in that no impact whatsoever range. It's only 3% that are above the $250,000. So what does it mean? Well, let's say your reported income is $400,000. At $400,000 right now, at $400,000, you're going to pay 4.95% in income tax, which is the flat rate that we have right now. Under the graduated rate, under the fair tax, remember it's graduated, so it starts at levels up to $250,000, which is where the graduation kicks in. At $400,000, you're going to pay 1% more. You're going to go up to 5.96% from the 4.95%. We think it's very reasonable. We think, more importantly, it puts the state of Illinois on a more solid financial footing than it is now. The governor has said straight away, This is not the solution to all of Illinois' financial problems. We openly admit that. However, it puts us, the state of Illinois, on a more financially sound footing. And it's worthwhile looking back where we were only about 18 months ago. We had $16 billion in back bills that we owed vendors. We were running up bills to the tune of $11 million a day. We were running up interest alone to the tune of $2 million a day. We owed $900 million in interest alone. That's $900 million coming out of your pockets that are doing nothing, no, not paving roads, not paying for health care. It's simply to pay interest. We have to get away from that. We had to get away from that. The governor said we can move us forward. We can put us on a more financially sound footing by moving to a fair tax. And that's what he has proposed, and the legislature agreed and is moving in that direction. Now, you're going to have the opportunity to vote on it. Come November of next year, you're going to have the opportunity to walk into that voting booth and say yes or no, I think this is a good idea. So you have the opportunity to change the Constitution. The governor fully recognizes that that is a major step. It is a constitutional change that does not happen very often. He feels it's the right direction, as do I. I feel it's the right direction to move in, again, because of the fact that 97% of individuals, taxpayers in the state of Illinois, are not going to be impacted. As a matter of fact, are going to benefit from the fair tax. That's the basic position that we're at. Overall, financially, Elliot asked me to address. This year, we passed a budget that, for really the first time in a long time, is balanced, and it's balanced on reasonable numbers. It's not balanced on sort of phony ideas, and I will confess that with Senator Cunningham sitting here, as he knows, the former governor wanted to sell the Thompson Center, as does Governor Pritzker. He wants to sell the Thompson Center down in the city of Chicago. But here's the difference. The former governor said, okay, a sale was going to be worth $300 million, and we're going to put that into the budget, knowing, quite frankly, that we're not going to sell the Thompson Center within a year, but we're putting $300 million into the budget that allows us basically to spend $300 million that's not there. Governor Pritzker took a different approach. He said, yes, I want to sell the Thompson Center. It might be worth $250 or $300 million, but I am not putting $250 or $300 million into the budget because I know we're not going to sell it in the next year. So the governor has been straightforward. He has been honest. He has been open. He recognizes that people have differences of opinion on many of his issues, the fair tax being one of them, but he's willing to listen. And he's willing to reach across the aisle if the people have better ideas. I can tell you that I sat, and I don't think I'm spilling any confidences here. The governor called both the Senate Minority Leader and the House Minority Leader into his office at separate times the day that he was going to release the idea of the fair tax, and he briefed them. He said, look, maybe if you have an idea that maybe we can make this a little better in some way, come to me, talk to me, let me know. You don't have to do it publicly. Call me up on the phone and let's see what we can do. The governor has earnestly tried to reach across the aisle. He's invited legislators from both sides of the aisle to the governor's mansion for dinner, for conversations. The capital bill that passed, which Senator Cunningham knows full well, the capital bill that passed was passed on a bipartisan basis to get our infrastructure going. So lots of positive things are happening. And I think that I'll close by saying this. Illinois was stagnant for whatever reason, and you can argue the reasons, but Illinois was stagnant for a number of years. We were in a terrible financial situation. Governor Pritzker has said, look, I want to move this state forward. I want to put us on a positive track for the future. I think that's what he's done. He has his proposals out there. You'll be able to offer your opinion on them by voting on them. But the capital bill, a major, major step forward to improve infrastructure throughout the state of Illinois, which is going to benefit literally all of the communities throughout the state, including those communities downstate that apparently seem to want to get rid of the city of Chicago from the state of Illinois, if you've heard about that. But that's a general overview. I could go into the specifics of taxation. I mean, the specifics of the budget, a $40 billion budget. The three or four biggest tax revenue items are the income tax, which brings in about $19 billion. The sales tax brings in about $8 billion. And then the corporate income tax brings in roughly $3.2 billion. Those are the biggies. And again, going back, we think that putting a fair tax in place puts Illinois on a more solid footing for the future, doesn't solve all the problems, but moves us in the right direction. So, have a discussion and be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we're going to start the panel portion of the program. Representative Slaughter is supposed to be here, so hopefully he'll get here soon and we'll be able to sit on the panel. We've got a lot to get to. We've got about an hour and 10 minutes. So I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves and, maybe do a minute about who you are and what brings you here today. And then I've got a whole list of questions that I'm excited to ask. And if you have questions in the audience, please, if you've got no cards, raise your hand. We will collect those no cards. I've already got a couple. They're great questions, and we'll take it from there. So, Senator Cunningham, take it away.
Thanks, Elliot. And thank you, everyone, for coming today. Thank you for to the Orland Chamber and to the SBAC for hosting this. It's a great turnout. I really appreciate that you've set aside some of your Tuesday morning to engage in this discussion. I am the state senator for the 18th district. We're in the 18th district right now. Essentially, we're on the far western end of it here in Orland Park, and my district goes as far northeast as into the city of Chicago till about 84th and Ashland in the city. So it takes many different communities, about 4 or 5 different Chicago neighborhoods, and a dozen suburban, southwest suburban communities are in the district. I've been in the state senate for, this is just my 7th session in the state senate. Been through some really tough times in Springfield, including a long budget stalemate that Director Harris referenced earlier. And happy that we've moved through that and that we're starting to work in a bipartisan manner. I really value forums like this, where obviously you've come here to hear what I think, but I also like hearing from you, and certainly open to criticism and input that these kind of forums present. So thanks again for coming, and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Senator. Mayor?
Good morning, everyone. Mayor Keith Pecaw, and I want to thank Director Harris and Senator Cunningham for coming out today to answer your questions. Regarding Senator Cunningham, we don't always agree on everything, but I can tell his constituents here that he is always open-minded, always listens to the mayors, and anytime I have a question or have something to, I guess where are we driving to? But he's always there to hear what we have to say and to try and help us with our local issues. So I appreciate that. And the reason I'm participating today is I was asked how I want to participate, and I felt it was really important to have a local voice because these taxes impact not only our local residents but also our local government significantly. So I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Anything else, Director Harris, in terms of an introduction? Okay, great.
Just wait for the discussion.
All right, wonderful. So I want to just add a little bit of color on the graduated income tax proposal and then begin to ask questions. So Director Harris did a great job of laying it out. The vote on whether or not to allow a graduated income tax, and that will be changing the flat tax structure to a graduated income tax, will be in November of 2020. This is one of the first forums like this in a while that I've heard about. There will be a lot coming up, and rooms will be full to discuss this. You will hear a lot on TV. You're going to hear a lot on the radio about the graduated income tax by people who are both for it and against it. And the purpose of today, we hope, is to hear from our elected officials and really get educated on this. So when people go into the booth in 2020 and take their vote, they're informed and they know what they're voting on. Another thing to understand about the graduated income tax is while the constitutional ballot will allow for a change in the flat tax, in May, outlined rates were voted on and approved by the legislature. So there are these tax rates that are already out there that there seems to be every reason to believe would be enacted if there is a graduated income tax, but maybe not. And maybe that's part of the discussion that we're going to have today. And I have a question about the rates. It's probably the first question that I'm going to ask after I ask everybody generally if they're for or against changing the flat tax to a graduated income tax. And finally, very importantly, this will be a scale. So if you make $400,000 and there is a graduated income tax, your first $250,000 will be taxed at one level, and then it will go up incrementally until you hit $1 million. And these are for joint filers. When you hit $1 million for a joint filer, everything is taxed at the highest rate. And I've got that down. The highest rate is 7.99%, based on what I wrote down very early this morning. So that's some of the outlines that I think, some of the framework that everybody should have. So after we have Representative Slaughter introduce himself, then we'll ask our first question.
Oh, should be used to this. Good morning, Illinois State Representative Justin Slaughter, 27th District. I represent the far south side of Chicago, as well as the Cook County, southwest Cook County suburbs. Actually do have a small piece of Orland Park. This isn't my district, but we're not too far away from here. Been in the legislature for a couple years, chairman of the House Judiciary Criminal Committee. So doing a lot in the criminal justice reform area, and happy to be here to talk about, and we'll talk about this, actually we've rebranded this as the fair tax, but graduated income tax, progressive income tax, it's a very interesting topic, and glad to be here to engage in the discussion.
Thank you so much, Representative. Senator Cunningham, I'm going to start with you. And the first question is pretty basic. It is, do you support the constitutional amendment that would change the flat tax to a graduated income tax? And if so, how do you feel about the proposed tax rates that were passed in May?
Yes, I do support it. I voted to both put the question on the ballot and in favor of the sort of preemptive bill we passed to establish the tax rates. So as been mentioned, you ultimately had the say in this. It will be on the ballot in from about 14 months from now. That's one of the reasons why I supported it, is because it does give the opportunity for ordinary citizens to express their point of view on it. The other reason I support it is because it's going to be really good for the people who live in my district. Director Harris mentioned that 97% of people in Illinois will see their income taxes either stay the same or go down. In my district, it's slightly higher than that. About 98% of the residents in my district will see their taxes either stay the same and go down. The other reason I supported it is gets back to what I've said earlier, having been in the legislature for a number of years now and seen the triage we perform on the budget year in and year out. I see that we have to have some sort of permanent solution, and one of those solutions has to be paying our bills. We do a horrible job of that in Illinois. As Director Harris said, during the budget standoffs a couple of years ago, when we went 2.5 years without a budget, we ended up with a pile of $16 billion in unpaid bills. There are vendors, maybe some here, I know there's some in my district, in Orland Park, who weren't being paid by the state. We're providing services and not being paid. There were municipal governments, the same thing. There were owed dollars from the state and not being paid. And there's a reason for that. We have a structural deficit that is built into our budget. And there's a long history behind that. But the fact of the matter is, despite the fact that there are about 10,000 fewer state employees now than there were in the early 90s, the state continues to spend more money than it takes in. And we have a tax system that was put in place in the 1970s when we had a completely different economy than we do now, an industrial economy. Our tax code does not reflect that. This is one of the changes we can make to change that and to increase the amount of revenue that does come into the state without burdening middle-class families and get us to the point where we can pay our bills. I think that's a pretty good summary for why I supported it. And as I said, at the end of the day, it will be up to the voters to decide whether or not this becomes law. If it doesn't, we'll have to find other ways to address this budget imbalance, which will involve further cuts to services and probably an increase of the flat rate, which will ensure that everyone's taxes go up and not just the wealthiest among us.
Thank you so much, Senator. Anything to add?
If I may, yeah, we have.
Yeah.
I think we have a little bit of time. A couple of things I'd like to point out. First of all, what Elliot said earlier, that if you make up to $250,000, or if you make $250,000, you're going to be taxed at one rate. Let me vary that a little bit. If you make $250,000, you're going to be taxed at three rates, because it's a progressive tax. So your first $10,000 is taxed at one rate. The next $10,000 to $100,000 is taxed at another rate, and you don't hit the 4.95% until you hit $100,000 to $250,000. So my point is, prior to $100,000, you're taxed at a lower rate than what the tax rate is now. So that's where you get that progressivity, and that's where you get the benefit of a lower tax for folks who earn less than $250,000. And one of the things, and the senator brought this out, and which I think is a great point, the rates are known ahead of time. So the question was always, well, they're going to go to a fair tax, and they're going to have a different rates, but we don't know what the rates are. And the governor specifically said, put the rates out there. I want the people to know what the rates are going to be before they vote on this important constitutional change. So he's very straightforward, put the rates out there. The Senate, in its wisdom, made some minor modification to the rates, but that was fine. And lastly, if you look at states surrounding us, the rate that's been proposed, if you go to Wisconsin, you're going to pay at the upper end, you're going to pay the same rate basically as what you would pay here in Illinois. If you go to Iowa, at the upper end, you're going to pay more than what you would pay in Illinois. So this does not make us non-competitive with some of our other states. Now, some states have lower rates, and Indiana has a fixed rate and the like, although you have county taxes in Indiana. Let's not get into that. So it's not exactly an apples-to-apples comparison. But the point is, we believe it's fair, we believe it's equitable, and that's why the rates were put out there for you all to see before you voted on the question.
Thank you, Director, and thank you for that clarification. Mayor Picah?
Yes, I do not support this referendum. There's three reasons. One is the state of Illinois has a spending problem, not a revenue problem. So taxes were raised in 2011 from 3% to 5%. We saw a $5 billion increase in our tax revenue. We still have a deficit. In 2018, we have about a $6 billion increase in revenue because of another increase in taxes, and we still have a deficit. We've had a deficit back to 2001. I agree with Senator Cunningham. It's a structural deficit, but it's a spending issue first, and we have to address that. Second, the state of Illinois legislature can't be trusted to keep their word. The state has been breaking promises to local government entities for years and taking away money from residents through that. They've also been breaking their promises regarding taxes. So if you look at the income tax in 2011, the increase, which was, it went from 3% to 5% for personal income tax. In 2015, it was slated to go back down to 3.75%, which it did, and it was supposed to stay that way until 2024. And then in 2025, it was going to go to 3.25%. Well, once it hit in 2015, it rolled back to 3.75%. You heard many in the legislature saying we need to keep it fixed at 5. So again, breaking a promise we already made. Then in 2017, we raised it back up to 4.95%. So while all of the rates have been published, once you give a constitutional amendment, they can change those rates to whatever they want. So those rates aren't going to necessarily stay the same. We've already seen a history of that in the last 8 years. But look at it also from the local government side. So the LDGF, the LGDF, Local Government Distributive Fund, was originally, when the income tax was put in, was originally agreed to be 10%. So they would share 10% of the income with all of the state municipalities on a per capita basis. That was so, and the agreement was that none of the municipalities would institute a local income tax. Well, in 2011, when they passed the income tax increase, they reduced that number to 6%. Then in 2015, as part of that deal, it went back up to 8% based on the plan. Then when it was done in 2017 and taxes were raised again, it went back down to 6%. Then they took a 10% haircut off of that, so it ended up at 5.45. They've given a little bit of it back. We're supposed to be grateful for that. We're now at 5.75 cents on the dollar, not 10 cents on the dollar. To put that in real numbers, Orland Park last year received $5.5 million in LDGF. If we were able to get the full 10%, we'd get another $4 million. Another $4 million would redo 20 parks in our system. It would do 3 million square feet of roads, or we reduce property taxes by almost 40%. So that's real money, and those were broken promises. So from what we've seen in the last decade, why would we think that the state is not going to change these rates as soon as they realize they still have more shortfalls because they don't address the spending issue? And then the last thing is state policies like progressive taxes they'll slow economic growth, and they're going to cause contraction rather than expansion. And Illinois needs to expand. And anyone who's been in Orland Park, we have all kinds of businesses that perform extremely well, and we're performing well. But PDQ restaurants, Anthony's Coal-Fired Pizzas, they were doing great in Orland Park. They pulled out of Illinois as a whole because they just don't want to be part of Illinois anymore. So they entered Illinois a couple years ago, and then with the policies that have been put in place, they've left. So how many of you here have relatives or friends that have moved to Indiana or Florida or Texas? So we're losing people. We're a net exporter of people. There's 2 states in the union that are net exporters of people, us and West Virginia. So depressed coal mining country is in the same level as the state of Illinois. And that's a shame because we have too many advantages for that to be happening. And I believe it's the state policies that cause that. So for those reasons, I will be against it. But the senator is exactly right that the people have a choice to vote for this referendum and give the state a blank check or not. In my opinion, it's the last chance for the people of Illinois to say enough is enough.
All right, thank you. Representative Slaughter.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see if I get that same round of applause. I like Senator Cunningham, also supported the initiative. I think it's always a positive, healthy thing for our democracy when we give the power to the people. We're putting this on the ballot for you to decide. Whether we will have it or not, that'll bear itself out based on the decisions that the people will make. And I think that that's always, well, actually not always, but I think it's a great thing that we can do here in Illinois. Secondly, it's important to know, I mean, state legislatures as well as the federal government, we introduce and move and have subject matter hearings for many, many, many different reasons. Sometimes we do things based on data and research. Sometimes there's a particular constituent that brings us an issue. Oftentimes we will take recommendations from a commission or a task force. Oftentimes we look at the state legislatures will look at the national landscape to see, are other states doing this? Will we be innovative if we pass a bill, or will we be bringing ourselves in line with other states? Ladies and gentlemen, and I believe we're actually the last of the Mohicans. How many other states have flat taxes? At 3 or is it 7? I thought it was a total of maybe 2 or 3 other ones that have flat taxes. So, I look at this as, so, and there actually are people out there that, say that the other 45, 46 states are doing this wrong. Like Senator Cunningham, in probably even a higher percent, he's at 98, I'm probably at 99% of my voters actually believe that a fair tax would help them. I primarily represent the African American community on the far south side of Chicago. So that's another reason I really wanted to get behind this initiative. The other thing is that we've seen that the sky is not falling. We just talked about out-migration. California has the highest income tax rate in the country. High earners and wealthy folks move there every day. We just saw Minnesota over the last 5 or 6 years kind of go through their progressive income tax reforms. They are experiencing unprecedented growth. I believe Connecticut was the last state, I think, who went to a progressive income tax. Again, sky is not falling. They've seen pretty strong growth as well in Connecticut. And then budget stability, as all of us are talking about. Many folks are attracted to good schools, thriving job markets, but also, are we doing what we need to stabilize our budgets? And I do believe the revenue from the fair tax will do that. And then lastly, small businesses. I believe, is my understanding, that pass-through corporations, LLCs, S-corps, sole proprietorships, these are businesses that are taxed at the personal income tax level. Here in Illinois, I believe it's about 60 to 70% of those businesses actually are not generating more than $250,000 in revenue. There's only, I believe, about 3, 4, 5% of those businesses that are earning up to that $1 million threshold that you had mentioned. And so for the most part, small businesses may actually see a modest tax relief out of it. Now that remains to be determined, but these are some of the analyses that are out there. So these are all reasons that I supported the initiative.
Let me, if I may, just offer a couple of additional comments along these lines. First of all, to answer Representative Slaughter's question there, the U.S. government, as you know, uses a progressive tax. There are 41 states that levy an income tax. There are 9 states that do not levy an income tax, Texas and North Dakota because of extraction of natural resources, Florida. But of the 41 states that have an income tax, 33 of them use the graduated or progressive nature. So this change would put us clearly in sync with most of the other states. I just want to pick up on what the mayor observed. I was a legislator for a total of 18 years. Believe me, I tried to be as responsive to my local communities as possible. And I don't disagree with what he said. Some of what he said. The state has cut back on the local government distributive fund that was initially agreed to when it went into effect. It was initially going to be 10%, and the local government share has been reduced. At the same time, going to the fair tax is going to increase the amount of revenue that goes to local governments by about $200 million statewide. Now, if you don't go to the fair tax, picking up on what Senator Cunningham said, if we have these bills which have to be paid, and quite frankly, one of the reasons we have these bills and a backlog that have to be paid is because we ran up $16 billion in back bills under the old administration. I was a Republican. I sat there, and we had a governor who would not put forward a reasonable budget and work with the other side of the aisle to come up with a budget. So for 2 years we didn't have a budget. But let's go somewhere else. But if we don't move to a different basis, what do? Well, we can cut services by the tune of $3 or $4 billion or more and the services that people count on. And here we're talking about the state police, agriculture, natural resources. It takes a lot, and our revenue in the state of Illinois is no different from any other large state like ours in terms of how much we bring in. We can cut services, and oh, by the way, one of the largest policy groups in the state of Illinois, Mr. Mayor, has suggested as a way to cut $2 billion out of the budget to totally eliminate the local government distributive fund. Now tell me what local municipalities would think about that. Or if you don't do that, then you raise the tax on everybody, as the senator referenced. You just raise the flat tax. And the logic that this gives the legislature a carte blanche to raise taxes, when I came into the legislature in 1983 for the first time, the tax was 2.5%. Income tax was 2.5%. It's now 4.95%. My point is, even though it was a flat tax, it's been raised a number of times. Raising taxes, I just personally disagree with the argument that, well, this is just going to give them a carte blanche, because raising taxes is a very difficult public policy issue that legislators do not take lightly. This is a big deal. So to make those changes, I don't think they would just routinely say, well, we'll just raise those rates. I don't think they would do that, but that's my opinion. Thank you.
All right, so what I've got is a series of questions, and there's themes that are coming in from the note cards. They pertain to property taxes. They pertain to what's going to happen with the money, and let's start there, because I think that speaks to everybody's point here a little bit. I've got about 5 questions that I definitely want to get to. So if I cut anybody off, it's not personal, please. It's just I want to get through all the questions. So there's a big concern by people in our organization, from others, that while they don't like the idea of a graduated income tax, they might be able to live with it if they knew the money was going to be spent to pay down the debt, to tackle our pension unfunded liabilities, and to not increase spending in other areas, a lockbox of sorts without using that term. And the question is, how do you feel about that? Is that something that you would come out on the record and say, listen, if there's going to be a graduated income tax increase, we want that money used to pay down our liabilities? Because then I think some people that wouldn't support it might consider having more of an open mind. Senator, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely why we need it. And I would support, there have been proposals in the past to lock in budget growth based on the rate of inflation. I would support doing that and using this money to pay those bills you talked about. I think we need a really brief history lesson of how we got here, how we got into this problem with the state shouldering debt. A lot of it has to do, as you all know, we've talked about it before, with pension debt. That is not a new problem. That is not something that the General Assembly in the last 10 to 12 years screwed up on. That is a problem more than 100 years in the making. Eric Madera used to be the Senate parliamentarian, has done a lot of work on the legality of pension reform and the history of it. He found a letter that was written by a board called the Illinois Pension Board back in 1917, 102 years ago, a letter to the governor then and the leaders of the General Assembly that said, you guys have a real problem here with these pensions. You're not setting aside enough money. It's going to cause a real financial burden on the state, and you need to take action right away. 1917, that letter was written, and the state legislature did nothing until the 90s, passed a law that mandated we start ramping up payments to pay off those debts that were skipped for decades. And it so happened that the bill that was passed in the 90s didn't start kicking in that payment plan till 10 years later. We're on that payment plan now, often called a ramp. Okay? That is what is sucking up more and more revenue, is us paying off those old debts. You know, anyone, you can go, a couple of years with only paying the minimum balance due on your credit card. See what that does to your finances. Or skip some payments and see what that does to your finances. That's what the state did. We have to stop that, and we have to pay off that debt. That's what progressive taxation will allow us to do by bringing more revenue in and paying that debt off. As I said, we've cut government operations. With 10,000 fewer state employees now than there were 25 years ago. We've decimated higher education in this state. That's one of the reasons why tuition's gone up, is because the state legislature has stopped fully funding higher education the way we did in the past. Why? Because we're putting $1 billion a year towards the state university pension system that they weren't doing years ago. All this money is being spent on debt that should have been paid years ago. And there's just no fairy dust to sprinkle over the state government operations that's going to make that debt go away. We have to pay it. And to me, the tax structure that's been proposed is the fairest way to pay it.
Thank you.
Just a quick observation. Two things. Number one, the pension debt, no question about it, is very real, very large. That liability. The state makes pension payments every year as its responsibility as the employer. For the past 6 years, the legislature has made that, 6 or 7 years, the legislature has made that pension payment in full. So kudos to the legislature, because they're working on this ramp that the senator referred to. And the other observation I'd make is this. You may have heard that we had, call it an April surprise, where the state took in $1.4 billion of revenue that we didn't expect to be there because of economic activity. I mean, you look around, people are working. The unemployment rate is the lowest it's been, in 50 years. They have income coming in. So we took in $1.4 billion that we weren't expecting. The governor wasted no time, without hesitation, said that $1.4 billion is going to go for one thing, and that's to make a pension payment. So he certainly recognizes the problem and wants to help solve it.
Thanks. Mayor, let me get the representative's take, because I'm just going to frame the question a little bit differently for you, okay, as a local official. So go ahead, Representative.
Okay. All right. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. We need to ensure that the revenue from the fair tax is going to be implemented and get the most value out of that. It's important to note that this wasn't, and I forgot how many folks actually did vote for it, but this wasn't a slam dunk. Several conversations, a lot of dialogue, both sides of the aisle. I know our caucus, Black Caucus, Progressive Caucus, we all talked about where is this revenue going to go. And I agree with the senator. I mean, there's so many issues that are on the table: pensions, backlog of bills, property taxes. We need to. There's certainly we certainly need to sit down and talk about where the revenue is going to go. How are we going to help out local municipalities? And so this is really, really important. We haven't. I don't believe we've made some hard decisions on that yet, but I'd like to see us maybe address our property tax issue. I mean, Illinois is sticking out like a sore thumb on this issue, and so I'd like to prioritize addressing our property tax challenges.
Okay, great, Mayor. So if a number of legislators were affirmatively came out, because we've had some who have and some who have wavered and said, listen, we're going to commit that any new revenue that's brought in through the graduated income tax would be put towards paying down the pension debt and our unpaid bills. How would that impact your overall feelings about a graduated income tax?
I guess I don't live in Missouri, but I'd say the show me state, because really, again, I don't trust that what is said is what will actually be done. For example, we have in the new the governor's come out with over $10 billion in new spending promises. Well, this income tax isn't going to cover all of that. I agree with Senator Cunningham. This problem is well before this legislature, and I've heard some legislators that were in the 70s, and they're blaming the current legislators. The legislators in the past gave us this problem, and it dates back a long time. There was $2 billion of unfunded liabilities in 1970 in the pensions. Now there's $133 billion. So this problem's been happening for a long time. Our long-term debt in 2008 was $56 billion. Now it's $214 billion. again, these are systemic problems. We need to address those first. In 1970, the convention said we're going to fund 50% of the schools. The state hasn't fulfilled that promise either. So the lottery was going to fund the schools. I mean, we hear this, so I don't trust that any lockbox is actually going to be a lockbox. The only thing that would make me trust anything is if there was another constitutional amendment. So why don't we have a constitutional amendment at the same time that fixes the pension issue? We know that that's what would give us the ability to fix the pension issue. So put that one on there as well, and then maybe I would start to believe it.
All right, so that's so now I had my property tax question, but I'm going to skip it because that's a really good segue into the question about the pension. So I have heard from legislators both that the pension question can be put on the ballot and cannot be put on the ballot, because you hear a lot of people saying if you're going to open one thing up to the voters, open other things up to the voters. I mean, we'd like to see fair maps opened up to the voters. So the question that I've got is, if this graduated income tax is on the ballot, can the pension, attacking the pension crisis, be put on the ballot? Are there changes that could be made in that regard, Senator? And if not, what are ideas to truly get to where we need to be to manage the pension crisis?
So yeah, the people have advocated, as you mentioned, Elliot, well, why don't you put an amendment to the referendum to the voters to strip out the pension protection language that is currently in the Constitution. Remember, we passed, Justin wasn't in the legislature yet, but David and I were, we passed a massive pension reform package back in December of 2013 that would have really reduced a lot of these costs. Bipartisan basis, it was thrown out by the Supreme Court because of the strong language in the state constitution that says we cannot impair pension benefits. So the proposal's been, well, let's rip that language out of the Constitution with an amendment and then try it again. I think we can certainly try that. I think it is complete false hope that we'd be selling people on, because there's another constitution to deal with, the United States Constitution. And Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution says that no state legislature can pass a law impairing the obligation of contracts. That's why you've probably heard before said, well, states can't declare bankruptcy because of the Constitution. It's because of that clause in the U.S. Constitution, the contracts clause is often referred to. So we could pass that, but it's not going to do anything to undo the contractual agreement with existing employees and existing retirees, and that agreement is what has caused all this debt that we have to pay off. Remember, in 2011, the state passed a new pension system, a Tier 2 pension. It is a greatly reduced pension. In fact, it is argued that it is worse than the benefits offered to Social Security recipients for people, that's anyone, including me, hired by the state after January 1st, 2011. So we've already taken care of employees moving forward. We've reduced those pension benefits. We have to pay off the debt. There's just no way around it. We tried doing it with pension reform, as I mentioned a few years ago. We hoped, frankly, that the state Supreme Court would ignore the plain language of the Constitution. They didn't. They said, it says what it means what it says. To go back down that path again of doing something that is explicitly contrary to constitutional language, this time the federal Constitution, I think it is a waste of time.
All right, thank you. Let me ask you, Director, so it's sort of a piggyback on this question. If this can't be attacked via ballot initiative, the pension, and other people may feel differently, but is this graduated income tax, are these rates going to essentially begin solving the problem? So in 3 years, in 5 years, we're not back in the same place where I think much to the mayor's point, the legislator says, well, what we did wasn't enough. Now we need to raise rates higher.
The senator made reference to this. We, the state, have this ramp in place that was passed in the mid-90s that says by 2045, the state will have 90% of its funded liability, pension liability, be at 90% of liability. We are on a ramp to get there. The difficulty is that that ramp is costing the state every year, as the employer that has to make the contributions, is costing the state more and more every year to meet that requirement. So our three biggest expenditures from the General Revenue Fund are Medicaid, pensions, and elementary and secondary education. By the way, the lottery brings in about $7 billion. We spend $600 million on elementary and secondary education. So there's a magnitude of difference there. But the point is, we're on this ramp, and the ramp, we're making the payments, and by 2045, if we continue to make the payments as we are, we will be at 90% of funding. If we continue to make the payments, 90% of funding. But those payments are soaking up about 23% of every tax dollar that goes into the General Revenue Fund. So that's the difficulty that we have to try to get around. And again, the governor has said the fair tax doesn't answer all of our problems, but it puts us on a more solid financial footing so we can make those pension payments.
Mayor, would you like to weigh in on that?
Yeah, we go back to the $1.4 billion surprise. The key to all of this is economic growth. And to the representative's point, he said this tax will impact small businesses. 25 to 30% of the small businesses, by his numbers, would be impacted by this tax because they get above $250,000. Well, as a small business owner, I made more than, when I owned my business, I made more than $250,000 a few years. And when I did, I plowed that money back into my business. I didn't take it all into my pocket. And if you tax that money, then it's not getting put back in my business. Currently, small businesses create 70% of the jobs in the state of Illinois. So this tax is going to have a huge impact on our economic growth. So we're not going to be able to grow. We're not going to, and our revenues probably won't meet the projections because they never do. And other policies like the minimum wage, we talk about the minimum wage law. We did an analysis just in the village of Orland Park. Okay, this is just the village. Between now and 2025, that minimum wage law will cost us between $2 million and $7 million. And you say, well, how can the numbers be so different? Well, $2 million is only if the only people getting the raises are the people with the minimum wage. $7 million is if the people who are also part-time get the similar bumps. So it's going to be somewhere in between that $2 million and $7 million. It's going to cost us, by 2025, an additional $2 million in our budget every year for our part-time people. What's that going to mean? We're probably going to have to lay people off and not have as many people. What's that going to do for our economy in the long run? And businesses face the same issue.
All right, thank you. Representative?
Well, no, without a doubt, I think on the pension challenge, we in that both sides of the aisle, I think everyone is spending a tremendous amount of time, energy, and effort trying to address the issues that we have with our pensions. Not really much more to add, other than it's important, I think, to leverage this situation with the fair tax and the dialogue that we're having about pensions to put forth solutions that are legal and constitutional. The senator was hitting on this as well. A lot of time and energy is spent on this, but we've put forth a lot of solutions that are not constitutional. Let's, on the front end, make sure that these solutions are constitutional, and then have dialogue on something that can actually be implemented if passed.
All right, thank you. So Mayor Mahoney has wrote down a question, and we've got this from a lot of different folks, and it's really property taxes. So the question that we're asked over and over and over again is, well, first we're told that property taxes are a bit out of control in the state. And then we're asked if there's going to be a graduated income tax. Is that going to be tied to any type of property tax relief? And really interested in your thoughts on that, on coupling those together. We know a commission was created in Springfield, but a commission doesn't lower taxes. So what can be done to bring those two things together?
It's an excellent question by an excellent mayor, if I can kiss up to one of the mayors in my district. So, you know, if I walk out of here and go to the precinct just west from here and walk there with a clipboard, which I have before up and down West Avenue, I did last year when I had my petitions out, and I ask people when I knock on their doors what the most important issue they think out there they're facing is. Overwhelmingly, I mean, there's not even anything in a close second place as property taxes. That's what people say. They're mad about their property taxes. Now, as a state legislator, I get kind of an out on that if I want to take it. I can say, hey, don't blame me. The state doesn't charge property taxes. The local government does. Blame your school board, blame your mayor, blame the county, blame the water reclamation district. That has nothing to do with me. I could say that. I don't, because one of the reasons property taxes are so high in Illinois is the fault of the state. Mayor Pekow mentioned this earlier. The state in its constitution says we will fund education. The state will provide the majority of funding for education. We don't do that. The state government pays probably about 30% of what local school districts need to fund their education. So as a result, your property taxes have gone up. You all know, you can look at your property tax bills. It's mostly because of your school districts. That's because the state has underfunded schools. That's why your property taxes are high. So what do we do about that? What's a potential solution? We passed a bill in the Senate. It wasn't taken up in the House this year, Senate Bill 920, that gets back to something that was kicked around 25 years ago in the Dawn Clark-Netsch versus Jim Edgar governor's race about a property tax swap, where income taxes go up and property taxes are reduced. So we've done a couple things. One is this bill I mentioned, which would say that if the state fully funds education every year, which would include $350 million in new funding every year, that's something we've done each of the last couple of years. As long as we keep doing that, it freezes the property tax levy that the local school district can charge. They're going to be getting additional money through the state, so they cannot raise that levy. Okay, so that's a way, and we will only be able to do that with the progressive income tax, bringing in more money from income taxes and reducing the pressure on property taxes. That's that same property tax swap idea that's been around for 20 years. That's one of the ways we can do this. There's another proposal out there, very controversial, and I'm not sure that we can get there. A lot of the property tax pressure you get from your municipality is, again, paying for pensions. There are over 600 local public safety pension funds in the state of Illinois. And the local municipalities, not all of them, but the majority of them did the same thing the state did for decades and decades, and they underfunded their local police and fire pension funds. There is a proposal out there, there's a number of variations on it. The most radical variation would be to consolidate all those pension funds into one and turn it into a state pension fund where the state would pick up the payments for the local municipalities, relieving property taxpayers of that burden. Now, that's very costly. That would cost the state in addition well more than $1 billion a year. But it's potential that that's something that could be tapped from the new income that comes in from the progressive tax. Would also, really increase the state's long-term liability at a time where we're struggling to hold the line on what bond houses think about our debt. So that is by no means a silver bullet. That's a difficult thing to tackle, but it is a potential outlet for property tax relief that involves the state picking up a bigger burden and maybe meeting the burden it promised to shoulder back during the 1970 Constitutional Convention.
Director?
Thank you, Elliot. And just very briefly, first of all, I have a commitment up in northern Cook County at noon, so unfortunately I've got to leave here very shortly. But two comments along this line. the property tax is a real conundrum. I mean, you all want good schools, and you're willing to pay for those good schools through your property taxes, but the property taxes continue to go up. The mayor relies on the property taxes for a good chunk of his income. It's a real conundrum. The governor did recognize that we need to provide some relief here, and if you are aware, when you fill out your when you fill out your income tax, you get a 5% credit of what you paid on property taxes on your income taxes, okay? You get a 5% credit. The governor has said, if we put the fair tax into place, we're going to give it an increase of 20%. We're going to go up to 6% credit on the property taxes that you get on your income tax. Unfortunately, most people don't realize that that's a benefit to them in the property tax world. They just look at their property tax bill and they don't equate it to their income taxes, that they're getting that credit off the income tax. But the governor is trying to address that issue in that regard. The other thing I'll tell you, and in driving through, coming down here, as I said at the start, I don't get down to to southern Cook County all that often, and I really was struck by the economic vitality that I saw around me. I'm in northwestern Cook County. I'm up in Arlington Heights, which is an economically vibrant area as well. I will tell you that 3 houses on my street, the people left within the last year, okay? And believe me, my property taxes are, there's 5 digits on the property tax bill. But 3 houses went up for sale. Those 3 houses were sold. They were sold to families that have young kids because they want the schools, they want the parks, they want the library, they want the services that are there. And oh, by the way, when they purchased the house, they knew what the property taxes were. And it's not like it was a surprise to them. Now, granted, I don't like to pay high property taxes any more than anybody else. But my point is that people are willing to move in. And when we talk about economic vitality, just look at recent headlines. Uber's hiring 2,000 new people in the Chicago area. Amazon is putting in 400 new jobs in the Chicago area. Look at the infrastructure bill that was passed. $14 million, as an example, went out to the Rockford Airport for UPS and Amazon out at the Rockford Airport. This state has dynamic economic opportunity if we invest in it, and that's what the governor's trying to do. So don't mean to be long-winded. Let me just close by saying this. Great forum. Whether you're for the fair tax or against the fair tax, understand completely. Great forum. You're going to be talking about it a lot between now and November of next year. Your legislators are going to be listening to you, and I was delighted to be part of it here today. And I'm sorry that I have to leave a little bit early. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mayor, you're up.
So I like the fact that Senator Cunningham calls it as he sees it. He doesn't try and sugarcoat it. That's one of the things that I like about him. And now I'm sucking up to my senator. He's absolutely correct that the pressure on the property tax is largely due to the state's unkept promises. So Orland Park, because it's a home rule community and because of our retail base and all that, we have options when the state impacts our LDGF by $4 million, like I said. We have other alternatives potentially. But $4 million is still a lot to us, but we can do something about it. But take a town like Harvey as an example. That's a $2 million hit to them. They don't have the options that we have. And their only option there is property tax, which drives up their property tax. And we all know the property tax issues with some of the economically disadvantaged areas like Ford Heights and things like that. That's why they have these problems. Same thing with schools. If we don't fund the schools like we talked about, we just talked about the lottery, $7 billion coming in, $600 million going to schools from that. If you don't fund the schools only have one lever, and that's property tax. And oh, by the way, there's a ton of unfunded mandates that come out of the state as well. And so those unfunded mandates that go to a school, that go to a fire district, they have to pay for that in some way. The only option they have is either to cut programs and services or property tax, because that's the only lever that they have. So it all boils back, as the senator said, it boils back largely to the state historically not doing their job as far as what they've promised. So that's why the property tax is so challenging, because we'd all like to see property tax go down. Orland Park hasn't raised its property tax in 11 years, but that's because we have the economic ability to do that. But other towns, other districts don't have that options. And on the pension issue, clearly pensions is the big bogey for all of us. Our police pension this year, 40% of their salary is what our police pension is. It went up $1 million. That's a big hit to our budget. So the consolidation that Senator Cunningham talks about, and he talked about the one extreme bill. There's another bill that I think most of the mayors agree with that is not very extreme. It's also consolidation, but it consolidates it into one fund controlled by the IMRF, which is very successful, but everyone keeps their own account. So therefore, you know, the city of Chicago, who's way underfunded, we won't be bailing them out. We'll still be dealing with just our own pensions. But I believe, you know, Mayor Mahoney asked the question, and I believe his town, just by going to the IMF for the next 10 years, would go from 40% funding to 90. Is that correct? Roughly? 45 to 75. We would go from 70 to over 90. With no other changes, just getting better returns, because in smaller funds, we cannot get the returns that pooled funds could get on our money, not to mention the administrative costs. And that doesn't even factor in the administrative savings, so it'll probably be higher than that, because there will be administrative savings too, but nobody knows exactly what that will be. That's just getting the returns that the IMF's been able to get because they can pool the money together. So those are critical things. I mean, to me, that's an easy one. That's a no-brainer, and we can't even get that passed. If we can't get that passed, what chance do we have to get the big stuff done?
Representative?
Yeah, and just really quickly, property tax is huge, humongous challenge that we're trying to address here. I do think that there's been, because of the fair tax dialogue, we've been able to talk more about property taxes. We referenced the property tax task force, and this is, and I'm not joking, it's a 90-member task force that we have going here. But through the Fair Tax Initiative, also looking at the property tax credit, the property tax relief fund, I think we need to continue to flush the details out with that and look at the mechanics of that. But in short, yes, I am in favor of tying the two for sure.
And it sounds like, thank you. And to Mayor Picaw's point, things like government consolidation, it seems like these are things that we should be able to move. Senator, what do you see as some of the holdups there?
I think that we will pass some measure of consolidation for the police and fire funds. I think it will not be the radical one I mentioned. I think that that's probably too difficult to do, but I think that you will see some form of consolidation. As you know, Orland Park is a relatively large town. There are many smaller towns that have very small funds, and it's very difficult for them to leverage those dollars and investments. So I agree that is sort of the low-hanging fruit that we should be able to pass. There is a bipartisan working group on this that is supposed to come out with a recommendation by the end of this year. So I'm hopeful that's something that we'll work on early next spring's legislative session.
Yeah, Representative, anything on government consolidation or?
Nothing more. I think that the senator's right. We've had so we haven't gotten there in passing something, but in my opinion, we've had some pretty productive discussions around consolidation. I do think something will happen in the near future.
Fantastic. So I've got two quick questions and then one closing question. I'm trying to get through all the no cards, and these might be really easy. The first is there a discussion about expanding the sales tax right now in Illinois to try to raise additional revenue? I'm not sure whoever submitted that no card is for that proposition or against it, but that's the question.
There was, and actually, Governor Rauner, when he ran for governor, had a proposal to expand the base of the sales tax and to impose it on services. You know, I mentioned earlier about how our taxing structure is from a different economic era. Most of, you know, economic activity now, and not only here in Illinois, but throughout the country, isn't so much in old industrial manufacturing and the sale of goods. It's in the sale of services, and the tax code really doesn't reflect that. That was something that Governor Rauner pushed. But it was not something that the legislature acted on. think about it, the devil's in the detail on that. So people will say, well, let's increase, or let's put a tax on legal services. Let's put a tax on real estate services. Every one of those taxes obviously can be passed down, trickle down to consumers. That's one of the points of opposition, but also you get tremendous opposition from all those different groups. And as a result, it's difficult to pass something like that, although I think most economists will tell you the best tax is a low tax that is evenly applied. We don't have that right now in the sales tax. It's probably something that we should be looking at, but I think the progressive income tax proposal is sort of sucking all the oxygen out of the room right now.
Yeah, Representative, you heard anything
I
about it?
I was going to say the same thing, and not only that, I mean, a lot of the other big ticket items that we had this session kind of drowned out I think the dialogue around sales tax, or at least expanding the base. I do believe that the discussion will resurface, but I totally agree with the senator. These are difficult discussions. Which services do you choose? You certainly are going to get pushback and a lot of presence in Springfield, pushing back on whatever ones it looks like we're going to choose. So it'll be, I think the discussion will certainly resurface. However, I don't know kind of where we're going to go with that.
All right, and to that end, we've heard nothing about taxing retirees' income. Another question that I got, so we could keep it quick.
Yeah, I mean, it's been proposed. It's
Right.
something that the governor is pretty steadfastly against. In fact, he attacked two of his Democratic primary opponents who did propose that. There is another proposal out there that, again, I don't think is gaining any steam, but if there was progressive taxation, to levy a tax among high-income retirees and have that money specifically go to pay pension debt. Again, that's something that there's just a really big political obstacle to, that retaxing retirement income, which we don't do in Illinois. A lot of people don't realize that. I've gotten into arguments with retirees who claim they pay income taxes in the state of Illinois.
That's right.
They don't, but a lot of people still believe that they do. That is, I think, something that is politically very difficult to do.
Thank you. Anything else?
Easy questions? No, very, very, very difficult discussion. May pop back up and resurface, but the senator's right. This very explosive topic.
Yeah, I think maybe I haven't heard anything about it, so I didn't think if people are worried about imminent movement on that, we haven't heard anything. So that was really the question on the note card, I think. So what I'd like to do is give you all a minute or two to close. I do want to make a statement, and that is, we want to keep the narrative positive in the state of Illinois. I think businesses are worried when they're looking at increased taxes. The SBAC has been working to pass to bring back the small business job creation tax credit, which was a $2,500 tax credit for small businesses that hire businesses with 50 or less people who create net new jobs. I'd love to see that pass. I hope everybody can make a commitment that they'll help us get that done. What we saw in the last budget were some tax incentives for big businesses. But there wasn't a lot there for small businesses. It was disappointing to read at the end of the day. So maybe as you close, you could say, man, I'm for that tax credit. We'd love that. And then a close would be great.
No, I absolutely support that. I think there are other tax credits out there we can give businesses. You're right, we do overlook small businesses with a lot of the tax credits we give. And you cite a perfect example of one that I think that would really help. Mayor Pekow mentioned that small businesses employ collectively a lot more people than the large businesses that often get the attention. So that's something we definitely have to address, as well as research and development tax credits that have expired that I think we need to put back in place. In closing, I just want to thank everyone again for this forum. I think this is really important what we're doing here today, and I think it's something I give the SBAC and the Chamber credit for doing this. Hopefully, there'll be a lot of this over the next 14 months. You know, you're going to get, as we get closer to the next election day, and you mentioned this, Elliot, there's going to be a lot of TV commercials and what have you. I think everyone will get really sick of that, and that's really a poor way to debate a very important issue. I think getting together in forums like this where we're going to have a constructive conversation is much more valuable, and I hope to see a lot more of these. If anyone would like me to come and speak at an event and carry on this discussion in a different venue, I'm certainly open to doing that. Please contact me, and thanks again. Thank you to Mayor for hosting us here today too as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mayor?
I want to thank all of you for coming out and speaking. I think it's really important for people to hear what you have to say and to hear both sides of the issue because they're going to vote on it. You know, as I had pointed out, you know, to me there's three reasons not to support this. One, clearly we have a budget issues, but I think it revolves much more around spending than it does around revenue. The second is nothing in the state's history has shown that you can trust them to keep their word with what they're doing regarding our fiscal sanity and our taxes. So I just don't believe that you know, this is going to be the end. It's going to continue. And then lastly, you know, the last reason is that policies that increase taxes, I mean, that's economics 101. You increase taxes, you depress economic growth. Now, sometimes you overcome that, but I think we need economic growth. And you know, I was, for a long time, I was the chairman of Illinois Vets for Energy, and we met every year and talked to, there were like 30 different states that were involved in this. And when it came to giving an update on the state of Illinois, everyone would laugh because we're literally the laughing stock across the country. And I said, what are you laughing about? We're a microcosm of the United States at the moment. The state of Illinois has so many built-in advantages. We have a world-class city. We have a water resource that every other state in most countries would kill for. We have fertile farmland in the center of the state. We have energy resources in the southern part of the state. What other state has these advantages? You realize how hard you have to work to screw that up. And over decades and a century, we have. So it's not something to laugh about. We have so many advantages. We're a transportation hub for the whole country. Rail, road, and air. And again, we have these advantages. We need to use those advantages to grow economically to help us get out of this mess. And if we want to fix Illinois, we have to fix these fiscal issues. And obviously, I believe in reducing our spending. Others want revenue. Maybe there's a balanced approach to have, but if we don't fix these issues, we won't be able to take advantage of all of the advantages the state of Illinois has for economic growth, and that's what we have to do.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Representative.
Yeah, again, just wanted to thank the Orland Park Chamber of Commerce, Small Business Advocacy Council. I think all the panelists would agree that this is a great discussion to have. I think you set the standard, not just here, but for the state of Illinois. We need to do this throughout the state of Illinois and have this discussion. The mayor brings up a good point. Just because, and we'll see if we pass it, but just because we're talking about a fair tax, we also always need to look at our spending. I don't think we're saying that we shouldn't. That's something that's vitally important, and we need to continue to do that. I'd also encourage us to, as a state, continue to look at some of the states, if not all the states, that have a progressive income tax to see how it's working or not working in other states. And then lastly, yes, I mean, we definitely need to, while on this topic as a state, look at innovative, creative, new ways to positively impact small businesses. What can we do, you know, in terms of tax breaks, tax incentives, et cetera? It's a great time to talk about, well, not just talk about it, but introduce and pass things that can help small businesses. So with that being said, looking forward to continue to work with not just the legislature, but our local mayors, and more importantly, the people and the residents of the state of Illinois. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we give everybody a round of applause, Sue, Linda, thank you from the SBAC, Jamie, great job. All the SBAC folks who came out, thank you. And Orland Park, thank you so much. Felicitas, thank you, and your board for helping us host and putting this together. Very much appreciated. I agree. These are the types of conversations that we intend on having across the state, where people are having, you can disagree, and get out information so people can make an informed choice and feel good about what they just saw. And I thought this was a tremendous, tremendous panel. Thank you all for coming out, and please give everybody a round of applause. Thank you. And this is the amazing thing. If you reach out to your legislators, I didn't know until I started with other folks, the SBAC, most of the time they reach back out to you. And if you have questions and you have concerns, I would encourage you to talk to the folks on the stage and your other elected officials, because they will engage. And this is a really important time to engage. Thank you all.